When people get started with frameworks like React without having some of the essentials of JavaScript under their belt, one of the first things that confuses them is this really weird convention of having an object or an array on the left side of an equal sign. And that is actually called destructuring. And unlike what a lot of people think, that's actually not a concept from React. It's a concept that is part of just vanilla JavaScript. Destructuring is the concept of pulling out the information you need from either an array or an object and storing it in an independent variable. So let's take a look at this array, right? I have a const winners here, and the array has Sophia, Noor, and Tina in it. Let's assume that these are in an order of ranking. So Sophia was the first place winner, Noor was second, Tina was third. And I want to grab the first and second place winners. Now, normally, in order to do that, I would pull winners and then in brackets 0 for the first index, and that will give me Sophia. For the second place winner, again, I go winners and then 1 for the index, and that will give me Noor. And that's a perfectly great way of pulling that information out. You could also, take it a step further if you need to use it a lot and store them in their own variables, right? So I could have const first place equals winners 0, and then const second place equals winners 1. And that works great. If I were to console those out again, I will get first place, second place. Again, we've got Sophia and Noor, and it works great. But you see how I had to use 2 different lines in order to grab the information? With destructuring, I could do it in 1 line. So here's how you would do that with the concept of destructuring. Let's say that I want to store these in a const. You could also store it in a let or a var. It's all up to you. And because I'm destructuring this information from an array, I'm going to open up an array on the left side of my equal sign. And then inside, for the array, I'm just going to give my first index and the second index whatever name I want them to be. So in my case, I will call it first and second. And then on the right side of the equal sign, we're going to have our expression, right? In this case, the expression is, what am I destructuring from? What is the piece of information I'm evaluating in order to pluck out this information? And the answer here is winners, which is an array. So now if I were to console out first and second, you'll see that again, we've got Sophia and Noor in there, and it just worked. And I was able to do it in a single line and make it fairly clear once you understand the syntax, what I'm trying to do here. And that's really helpful and makes the code a little bit cleaner. But where destructuring really shines is objects. Let's say that we have an object called user info, and it has a first name, a last name, an age, and an array of objects that represent 2 popular posts. In order to destructure my first name and last name from this object, I'll use that same concept the way we did for the arrays. So I'm going to open up a const. Because I'm destructuring from an object, I'm going to open up some curly braces, and now I can put in the name of the properties that I want to pull out of this object, because an object has names for all of its properties typically, right? So in this case, I'm going to choose first and last. And if I pull that out of user info, let's take a look. There we go. We have my first name and my last name. But because it's an object and not an array, and we're not working with indices here, I could go first because I want to grab the first name, and I know that there's an age in there, so I could change that to age now and be able to grab 31. And there we go. We have Aruba and 31. And that's really, really handy because then you can pluck out whatever properties you want, or functions, because you can even have functions inside objects, and do whatever you need in a separate variable with them. You can also do it in a nested manner. So let's say that I wanted to grab the ID of the very first popular post that is in this object. First, we want to grab popular posts. So I'm going to grab popular posts, then I'm going to add a colon, because from here I want to destructure an array. So I'll open up the array, and then the very first item is an object, and I want to destructure the ID from that object. So we'll open up some curly braces, and then we'll type in ID, which is what we want to destructure. Now I've grabbed that, and in my console log, I can add ID, and I should see, yep, the number 23, because that is what we see on line 8 for the ID of the very first popular post. Now, typically, nested destructuring is, you can run into some dangerous things here, and it can feel a little bit unreliable, a little flaky, or maybe a little unstable. So I would recommend staying away from it. But sometimes when you know the information is airtight, or for whatever reason, you can do this, and it's really helpful. Another thing is, just because a property is called something doesn't mean you have to call the variable that you destructure it into the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this ID here. It's a little bit messy and I don't really like it. And let's say that I want to grab my first name, but I want to call it first name rather than first, which is what it's called in the user info object. Inside the user info object, it might be clear, but in my actual code, I want to be a little clearer, because there it's not going to be obvious that this is referring to a name. So I can choose the property that I want, add a colon in front of it, and then give it the new name, the alias that I want to refer it by. So we go like that and give it first name instead. And there you go. First name is how we're referring to it, and it still has the value of first from the user info object in there. So that's also really, really helpful. In the same vein, just like you can give it an alias, you can also give a property a default value. So let's say that I'm not sure if there is an age or not in this user info. Perhaps it's an optional property, and some users have it and some users don't. I can say age equals, 25, right? And right now you can see doing that didn't change the console log value of age. But what happens if I comment out age from user info? Now you can see that it's actually using the default value. So instead of getting a null or undefined or any kind of weird error, we get the default value that we gave it here. So same thing as when we do default values for parameters in functions inside PHP, which also works, by the way, in JavaScript. You can take an argument and give it a default value if you want. So you can do that with destructuring as well, and that can be really handy. Now, where do we most see this in React? So in React, you're often going to see this in two specific places, like a lot. And that is in a function. You might see a function like this, function user info. And when you open up those braces, inside it, you'll open up the curly braces as well, and then see perhaps age or something else. And what's happening is user info is being passed an object of arguments instead of discrete arguments with a comma separated sort of situation. And this function has decided that from this object, I just want to grab age. So instead of having something like, say, args, and then having that be the object and then destructuring it here, like this, we can just do it right there in the braces themselves. So that's a really, really common format that you see in the functions in a lot of JavaScript projects. And the other one that we'll see is in a bunch of hooks. So the most common hook that a lot of people are used to using in React is called the useState hook. And what this hook does, it's a function that takes in a value and it returns an array of two things. One, a particular state, and a function to allow you to change the state of something. So in order to initialize it, you often say something like this, const, and we're destructuring this array. So we open up the brackets, and then we'll see something like value and change value. And then of course on this side, you'll see use state, true, for example. And this is one of the first places that a lot of people start noticing the concept of destructuring, and it feels like this really weird, funky React thing. But in fact, it's not. It's just that useState is a function which returns an array, and that array, we know the first value is a state of some kind, and the second one is a function of some kind. and we're just destructuring it. But you don't have to write it this way. It could easily have been const state change equals use state true, and then you could have state change dot value and state change, or sorry, not state change dot value, but rather state change 0 because it's an array, and then state change 1 to grab the change value function. But this is less clear and not as well labeled, and by destructuring it, we made it really clear and really labeled, and also did it in one line, which is really, really clean. So the next time you see something like this, know that it's just destructuring, and hopefully it will feel a lot clearer and easier to understand for you.